Dan Cotton, the business owner, Dan Cotton, the gym owner. They're talking to entrepreneur Dan. They're not talking to Dan Cotton who goes home and hugs his kids and loves his wife. The ability to be confrontational is not necessarily natural for a lot of people. It doesn't come easily to us. Start confronting minor things early on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheer Biz podcast. I'm your host, Dan Cotton, and today we are going to be talking about how I personally became better at confrontation. And becoming better at confrontation is one of the most critical skills that you can acquire as a business owner, because you are often just a few critical and challenging conversations away from having the business that you truly hope for. So, buckle up. Let's get ready. Let's talk about how I use these techniques to get better at confrontation, which led to a improved staff culture, client culture, and overall effectiveness of my businesses. Now, you believe it or not, I know those of you who know me or those of you who listen to the podcast, you're like, wait, Dan had to get better at confrontation. And the reality is that the ability to be confrontational is not necessarily natural for a lot of people. It doesn't come easily to us. And I actually don't love confrontation. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do. I'm not one of those people who's like looking forward to a good argument. I like a good debate. I like a good respectful discussion, but I am not a person who's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I want to go pick a fight with that person and argue with them. I'll be honest, when I'm angry, all bets are off. That's a completely different circumstance, and I can go rounds with people when I'm like PO'd, but that's not a good position to be in as a business owner. That's not going to be an efficient conversation. And it's oftentimes those moments where I am ticked off that I am saying things that I don't truly mean. I put a lot more oomph behind the punches. I hurt people a little bit more, and that's not what I want to be doing. So that's not the kind of confrontation I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the ability to drop F-bombs and lose your mind on people. I'm talking about your ability to confront problems when they arise and have conversations with people. So I've had to intentionally force myself to confront things head on. And you might be wondering, again, like I said, you're so direct. What do you mean face things head on? Well, I'm direct once I'm in that situation. So when I'm in my logical brain, I have no problem being very direct with people, telling them exactly what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking, and just handling it right there. But when I'm in my emotional brain, it's a lot more like, no way, I don't want to have that conversation. I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to avoid eye contact with this person and duck into this room so I don't have to have the uncomfortable conversation that has to be had. And this is something that I've had to get really, really good at over the years. I've had to learn to be better at confrontation, because owning a business, you have to get better at this. And the reality is, my first experience getting better at confrontation was in law enforcement. I did that before I became a business owner, and I had to confront things as a military officer, but it's a little bit different in the Army when you have rank on somebody. So you just come up and you go, hey, private, do this thing. And there's not a lot of confrontation there. There's generally a lot of respectful disagreement, maybe some heated disagreement, but it's totally different in a military setting than from a business setting. Especially in the business setting, the confrontations that you're having are either with your staff or with your employees. And I know as a business owner, it can feel very restrictive, because with my staff, having confrontation with them means that something's wrong. I'm having to tell them something that they're not going to want to hear. And I'm concerned at any one of those times, because as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you know that your staff are critically important to your business running efficiently and or continuing to run. So you may feel locked in and unable to confront things as they arise with staff members, because you're afraid, well, if I confront it, then they'll quit, and then I'm hosed, and I'm not going to have the ability to host these classes, and we end up catastrophizing things away. And the same thing goes with a client, where we can have this perspective of like, oh, well, this person's paying me, they're paying to be here, they're a customer, and the customer's always right. Attitude can start to play into account, or I don't want to lose this customer, they pay a lot of money to the business, or I need this athlete on the team and I don't want them to quit. And so we can oftentimes avoid those confrontations. And the first step that you need to take in this is start confronting minor things early on. So when little things pop up, I want you to start confronting those things right away. Call it out right away. It's much easier to set the standard that you are not to be messed with at the beginning than it is once things have started to spiral out of control and they get bigger and bigger. And now you're confronting a massive issue where if you had just handled a couple issues early on, people would have minded their P's and Q's a little bit better because they would have known that you were going to call them out for those minor things. So making sure that you're on those small things early on can, yes, feel like you're getting on people and you're kind of riding their back, but it is so important as a business owner to set that standard early. So when you see something wrong, you correct it right away, because what you don't want to do is create habits within this customer or this employee that are going to later on frustrate you. And I would equate this to, for all of my coaches out there, as a coach, if at the beginning of the season, I set a standard really early on that we tumble with our legs together and that is the only acceptable answer and there is no other exception to that rule, your legs are together when you do a back handspring. Every single time that we don't do it to standard, I call it out and I tell the kids that their legs need to be together, those kind of things. Then I'm going to be handling that on the front end before it becomes a bad habit later in the season. And we get a comment from our judges who say legs are apart in tumbling. Well, now they've been doing it that way and I've never really enforced the standard. And now I'm suddenly coming back from competition going, we lost 3/10 on legs being apart. We need to fix this right now. Or flyers doing motions on the wrong count, right? If they do their high V on 3 and they're supposed to do it on 5 and they do it on 3 1,000 times, and I don't tell them because I want to avoid the confrontation. And then I do tell them it's on 5 a month and a half later. They're like, I've been doing it this way the whole time, so I think I'm right. And now they have a habit. So we want to confront those things really early. And when we do so, we set a really good standard. And the same thing goes with our customers. You know, when someone comes in and they are not behaving to standard, maybe in the parent room, or they're starting to cause drama, instead of letting those things fester and ignoring it, immediately confronting it and going up to that person and saying, hey, I hear you have some concerns. Let's chat about them. Confronting those things right away. I know it's not easy, but it will reduce friction later in the season when things are already heightened and people are tired and we're emotional over how teams place and all of those other things. We really, really set that standard that we confront problems early on and that you are not someone who is going to just stand by and allow things to be occurring in your gym. I've made these mistakes, you guys. I still yearly will look back and go, man, I should have handled that differently. I should have confronted that issue earlier. I should have handled this a little bit better. And it always comes down to confronting the issue sooner, because that always would have been a better solution than waiting until things got more frustrated. Number 2 is I recommend that you create an alter ego, which I know sounds somewhat crazy and like schizophrenic almost, but you need to have an alter ego. And that way they are talking to Dan Cotton, the business owner, Dan Cotton, the gym owner. They're talking to entrepreneur Dan. They're not talking to Dan Cotton, who goes home and hugs his kids and loves his wife. So we're talking about two very different people. Now, this was something that I learned and I've talked about before in the police world. It was how I always kept my cool dealing with suspects who would be intoxicated and rude and cursing at me and saying all kinds of horrible things they were going to do to me and my family. And the reality is I had to take a deep breath and go, they don't know who your family is and they don't know who you are. And they're just mad at the circumstances, the choices that they made that have now resulted in you becoming involved in their life and enforcing consequences upon them. And they don't like that. So you now are the physical representation of consequence. And so they're yelling at Officer Cotton. They're not yelling at Dan Cotton. They don't know Dan Cotton. They just know Officer Cotton. And all I can do is I can treat this person with respect throughout and realize that it's not actually a personal attack, even though they intend it to be a personal attack. And so by creating that alter ego and being able to say, you know what, Dan, nice Dan, is not good at confrontation, but business owner Dan is great at confrontation and very direct and going to handle things right as they come up, can help you kind of put on an exterior armor psychologically to where you're not feeling like you are putting yourself out there, you're putting the business owner out there. A great example of this is in cheer is you have those athletes that are like super shy in practice. They never talk to anyone. They have like a very stoic face. That's just them. That's their natural state of being. But then they get on the stage and you can't take your eyes off them. They're captivating. Their face is turned on the entire time. They are selling it. They are giving every single thing in that routine. And you're like, who is this? These are completely different people, right? That's their alter ego. That's their on the stage presence. You can do the exact same thing as a business owner, and you can have that alter ego, that other person that you are when you're functioning as a business owner. So there are ways to say, you know what, I'm going to handle confrontation. I'm going to put on this armor and I'm going to be the business owner and I'm just going to go handle this. And it doesn't matter that true me is uncomfortable with this. Business owner me is not uncomfortable with this. And I found that to be very, very helpful for me. And it prevents me from going into the emotional realm, which is the number 3 thing, which is as you handle your confrontation, the key is to be very direct and factual with your communication. Direct facts carry less emotion, and emotion leads to hesitation and feeling out of control. And emotion is just never a good position to be having a somewhat confrontational conversation from. When you do that, when you have emotion tied into it, that conversation is never going to be as effective as you need and want it to be. I highly recommend being very, very direct, knowing exactly what you want to say, be very, very factual about the things that you're trying to say, and just attack it very methodically, very clearly with your client. Let them know exactly what it is that's going on, or with your staff member, exactly what the problem is and exactly what the expectation is moving forward. That leaves a lot less room for argument and discussion of like, well, I disagree, or I don't think it should be like that. We take those things out of the mix, which I think can be really, really beneficial. I want to make sure that we are being direct and being factual in my communication. And that helps me to be more comfortable going into that initial confrontation. A story about this, or something that happened to me, is early on in our business, I had hired an employee who had worked for me a little bit in the summers, and they were great in those circumstances. And then they decided they wanted to move and come work at our gym. And I was super excited about this. I thought it was going to be great. I will tell you, fast forward a year and a half later, it ended terribly. I had to fire this person. It was not good at all. And I bear a lot of responsibility for that. Now, they bear way more because they are the person that they are, but I would have discovered that much earlier if I had been better at confrontation from the beginning. And I'll tell you, it's going to seem really innocuous, but if I had handled this differently, I think I would have had a better idea of what was to come, and I would have been handling confrontation earlier on. So this individual would always bring their backpack to the gym, and they didn't like the staff room. So they would always bring their backpack out into the gym. Now, our staff manager at the time had a rule that backpacks couldn't be in the gym from staff because it made the gym just look kind of messy and gross and cluttered. And they were like, look, take what you need out of your backpack and bring it in the gym, but otherwise leave it in the staff room. This particular individual, the staff member who was the problem, refused to do it. Like, outright refused, would be told by the staff manager, hey, I need you to leave your backpack in the staff room. And they just wouldn't do it. They'd go, yeah, I'm not going to do that, and just not do it. And I never really confronted it because I was like, oh, this person has an important role in the business. I need them. I need to keep them happy. And ultimately, that just continued to spiral, and it spiraled from the backpack thing to not reporting privates to all sorts of other misbehaviors that I never really confronted until it got to the boiling point where I was so frustrated that then we were fighting regularly and arguing and disagreeing, and it was very toxic. And then we had to part ways because ultimately it's my gym and I had to make that decision. There were other things in there. But if I could just go back to the backpack moment and I could confront it right then and say, this is unacceptable. If you cannot get on board with the way we do things in our gym, then maybe this is not the right location for you. I probably would have been much, much, much happier in the long run. So remember that. Remember that confronting those small things early on sets a standard and helps you know, is this relationship going to be something that long-term works out, or is it going to be something that is a long-term problem? And you too can do it by getting better at the confrontation. So as you leave the podcast, as you leave the episode, what do I want you to do? I want you to start having conversations earlier. That's it. That's the prescription. So if you're not great at confrontation, just start having conversations earlier. When athletes are late to practice, have the conversation with them. When staff are not doing things the right way, have the conversation immediately, or have the conversation with their manager to have the conversation immediately. When parents are behaving in a particular type of way, don't leave it, go and confront it. Confront those things right away, early on, set the standard, and people will quickly learn that you are not someone to be taken advantage of. And ultimately, as a business owner, that's what I want for you. I want you to not feel like people are taking advantage of you, treating you poorly, or treating your business and your staff or anything else poorly, right? We want to feel valued and appreciated for the value that we bring to people's lives. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for listening. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.